Okay, this is a short talk on the subject of leadership, of which I could say so much more. In my career, working in human resources and management and even sales, leadership has always come up high on the radar, because finding good leaders was and is a trick. Why is this field, which companies, institutions, and even entire nations depend on, so poorly defined? There were many times as a professional recruiter and headhunter when I was tasked by a client to find someone to fill a leadership or executive role. The criteria provided by them for the ideal candidate usually had to do with skills, but rarely did they actually ever define the real merits of a good leader. I searched and I studied this subject, and after 30 years of digging around and my own experiences as a manager, I boiled leadership down to two things, two qualities. Now, this might surprise you because you'd think that good leadership has to do with personality or charisma or, personal magnetism or that a good leader has to be tough or they have to be smart or this or that. But that's not the common denominator of good and even great leaders. Those qualities I just mentioned above are only factors, but they are not the pillars of good leadership. Good and even great leaders possess two dominant qualities which they stuck to during their leadership roles: predictability and consistency. Now, those are not personality traits per se, but they are qualities which anyone can learn to use. So what do we mean by predictable and consistent? Being predictable implies being honest, truthful, and also being true to one's word. Being consistent as a leader implies being trustworthy and loyal. All right. Look at your own life. Who do you trust? Who do you follow? Who do you take advice from? Isn't it usually the case that our best friend, our spouse, our mom, our dad, or our mentor, someone that has always been there for us, possesses these qualities? Leadership, of course, by definition involves picking up the sword and charging ahead. Leaders have to be visible. They have to be vocal. They have to be accountable. They have to provide direction, planning, and answers. But the constant thread in the weave of good leadership is actually consistency and predictability. Nobody wants to live under a dictatorship or a tyrant or somebody like that. Why? Because you can't predict them. And they certainly are not consistent or trustworthy, except possibly in their use of violence and force. The Syrian crisis at this time is a good example of terrible and inhumane leadership. Let's take Nelson Mandela, for instance. This man declared that South Africa must be rid of apartheid and that it must become a united nation, not a divided one. He was arrested, put in prison for nearly 30 years of his life, all because he stood up against an oppressive regime. But he never stopped leading the people with that dream. When he was released, he continued his campaign, and shortly after he became the president, and he abolished apartheid. You see, the people never stopped following him because Nelson Mandela never changed his tune. He was predictable, and he was certainly consistent. It's the same with Martin Luther King, or even Steve Jobs, the man who created Apple, and so many of the products that we use today. Or even a contemporary figure like Elon Musk, a man who's changing our world with his dreams. Consistency and predictability breed trust, confidence, and loyalty. Good leaders are truthful and they're transparent, and this adds to the quality of predictable consistency. Imagine you get into a plane to fly somewhere, and the pilot decides to fly to a different location, just randomly. Or instead of providing the smooth flight which the airline promised, he takes a shortcut and he flies the plane through rough storms, and your ride becomes anything but pleasant. Not a very predictable pilot, and certainly not consistent, right? Would you get back into a plane with that pilot? Would you follow him? Would you put your life in his hands? Not likely. There is a lot I could say to help shed light on the subject, but remember these two words, predictability and consistency, because they are pervasive. Good leaders wear those colors proudly. And when you vote for someone to take on a leadership role, such as the president of your nation or your company's CEO, or even your kid's soccer team, keep these two qualities in mind, because in the long run, these are the things that will really matter to you, to your kids, to your grandkids. Traditional benchmarks used to select leaders, such as background, experience, stage presence, or even compelling rhetoric and wonderful promises, are not the pillars which have proven to be the hallmark of the best leaders in the world. The above two qualities, being predictable and being consistent, are the winning tickets. With them, the real personality and their true merits are both embraced and demonstrated in their actions and not just in their words. We need more good leaders in the world. And with this bit of knowledge I have just provided here, which took a few decades to glean, anyone with a good heart and a good purpose can become a good, even a great leader. And with this knowledge, we can also make sure that the right people are leading us. Thank you very much.